Hey guys, it's Matt and JD here, and we're excited to announce that we're going to be doing Chess Olympiad coverage for the 44th Chess Olympiad.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Olympiad. You get a lot of tremendous number of great games. I mean, like every day there's 150 teams, so and each team is four players, and everybody's playing a game. So we're gonna have like more games than we know what to do with. We can't possibly even look at every game, let alone try to like reveal every game. So
So each day we're going to pick one game or two. We're going to go through those games with you guys, and then we're going to kind of talk about the results and just sort of our overall thoughts of how teams are doing and how they're going to do going forward. So let's break down the rules, JD. What kind of format do we have for this event?
if I understand correctly, it's a Swiss format, so it's just like a regular individual over the board tournament. It's instead of a single individual, it's four individuals. And you're just playing a match against another team. And if you win your game, your team gets a point. If you draw, your team gets a half a point. And at the end of the four games, the team with the most points is the winner.
Yep, and I think those match individual game points only matter for the tie breaks. So winning 4-0 versus 3-1, for example. And then it's an 11 round Swiss. We have about 150 teams, and the time control is 90 plus 30 with a 30-second, 30-minute bonus on move 40. So pretty slow games. They could take probably around 5 hours each, and no draws before move 30, which is always kind of a nice added rule to avoid the quick games.
I bet that we'll have a few Berlin draws that are less than 30 moves. You
Yeah,
just can't
yep.
offer a draw before move 30. You could play knight f3, knight g1, knight f3, back and forth all you want and draw in three moves if you wanted to.
Yeah, that is true. All right, so let's jump now to the list of teams and players. Let's see who we got here. Wow, starting at number one, the US with an average rating of 2771.
Yeah, we're powerhouses this year. Well, I mean, we're always powerhouses, but like one of the things that's interesting is that the probably the most famous American player is not on the team. There's no Nakamura on our team this year. This is the first year that I can remember that he hasn't played probably as long as I've been following top level chess.
Yeah, I haven't looked up the history, but I always remember him playing and being, a pretty prominent figure on our team, usually board one or two.
Yeah, but if he were playing, he would only be board four, and probably has something to do with like, Aronian moved to St. Louis, and then Fabi came back, and then Wesley So joined up, and then like Leonard Dominguez. Like none of these people were on the American team like even 5 6 years ago.
Yeah, so this team is going to just be dominant. And, when your alternate is a 2720 and Sam Shankland, he, he's going to be like board two or three on any other team. So this is
Yeah,
going to be
our alternate is higher rated than the average rating of any other team.
okay. There's a cool stat right there. So then we got the second seed, India, 2696 average rating. And I think India is going to be the team to watch. And not just India, the first team. There's an India 2 and an India 3.
India three. I mean, India three, like it's like India three is the 17th highest rated team of the 150 teams competing. They're like they're like Webster in the collegiate college thing, where Webster would always have like their A team, their B team, and their C team, and like their B and C team would get second and third. I feel like India has a shot to do something like that. How crazy would that be if India gets first, second, and third?
Yeah, I think they have a chance of getting two teams on the podium. And I'll tell you why. So India 3, all their players are over 2600. That's pretty impressive. But let's drill down to India 2. Here's what I like about India two's team. These are all young players, and some of them are very young players. And I think these guys are underrated, right? So we got Nihal Sarin board one, Kukesh board two, Adiban board three, Prague board four, and Sadwani board five. I mean, if you've been watching like the SCC, junior SCC, like we know these guys are all monsters. So I think this India 2 team could make the podium, and India 1, just by rating, is already second. Like they could easily make the podium as well.
Yeah, they're in India one is likely to make the podium. I mean, they tied for first in the last online Olympiad that we had. And there's another factor that gives India two a better chance. There's two teams missing from the list that are normally powerhouses. There's no Russia and there's no China. Why? Do you know why?
I know Russia for political reasons, but China won the last over the board iteration of this tournament, 2018, and China also won in 2014. And in the last two over the board events, Russia was third in both of them, 2018 and 2016. So, like you said, these are two top teams that aren't going to be playing.
Yeah, and I mean, I was trying to read why China's not playing, and Ding Liren, who was playing in Madrid, he simply stated that the Chinese teams, neither the women nor the men's team, is going to play, and didn't give any real reason at all. So I'm super curious if this like comes out at some point. This is going to be a talking point that these two teams are missing. Like that's going to be something that I mean, commentators are going to have to fill a lot of hours while they're watching these games, and I suspect this is going to be a topic that's going to come up.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear why, because I mean, China has just been a really dominant team in these events. I want to look at Norway too. That's the three seed, and they are being carried in terms of rating by Magnus Carlsen with a 2864 rating. None of the other players are above 2700. What do you think of their chances?
So this kind of like I'm wearing my Pro Chess League shirt, and the Pro Chess League runs an awful lot like the Olympiad's going to run, and there was lots of discussion about like what the best strategy for building your team was because they had more flexibility there, and a lot of teams did take this strategy of they would try to get one powerhouse and then fill out with lower rated players, especially if they could get a board four who was underrated. And the reason why that happened so much in the Pro Chess League is because there was a cap on your average rating. So you had to figure out how to allot that. There's no cap on ratings for this, but like Norway kind of has that Pro Chess League strategy to their team where they have one powerhouse and then they kind of backfill the rest of the way. I really don't think that's the best way to go. I think that having a more consistent team across the board probably would give them better chances.
I
Because I
agree.
mean, Magnus can win all of his games, but if they don't win on boards 2 through 4, they're not going to win matches.
I agree with you. I think this puts a ton of pressure on Magnus to win almost every game because the other boards, you're going to have an average rating of what, like 2610, I think, for boards 2 through 4. We'll have to face against like the US team. That's going to be hard. That's going to be really hard.
Yeah, it's
Um,
going to be really tough. What
yeah.
other what teams are you rooting for? Okay, we're obviously both rooting for the U.S., being that we're good patriotic boys. But who else are you thinking about?
So I'm definitely rooting for US first. I think India too, second. I'm just really excited for that India 2 team.
Okay,
Third, I would say Norway. And then if I had to go to a fourth team, I kind of like Germany personally. I just think they
you
have a lot
stole
of.
my team. You stole my
I,
team.
I knew you were going to say Germany. Okay, tell me what you like about them.
Well, I mostly like. I mean, I lived in Germany for a little while, so I've always had an affinity for all things German. Like usually in the World Cup, I root for Germany, even above the U.S., just because I think that Germany always has a better chance of doing anything in the World Cup. So yeah, I just really enjoyed. I just enjoyed Germany and enjoyed living there. Would love to go back, and so I just always support their team and most everything that they do. Some other teams that I'm interested in are I like the Serbian team again. Just because so many of my coworkers are Serbian, that I feel like somehow an allegiance to the Serbian team as well. Even though, if we're honest here, I don't think the Serbian team has any any real chances at all. I mean, maybe they'll surprise us, but I'll root for them against whoever they're playing. And then, sort of the last team that I want to root for is Iceland, and that's actually just a straight carryover from the Pro Chess League because the Icelandic team in the Pro Chess League, they were the Puffins, and they have the super famous video where they're yelling about the Puffins, the Puffins, the Puffins, and that's always stuck with me. So for that reason, I just think that they're great people as well. And so those are the teams that I'm going to root for.
I like that list. More exciting than mine. I'm rooting for all the top teams somehow.
Yeah. There's one other team that's actually like could be a powerhouse, but just isn't this year. I mean, they're still a strong team, but that's the French team. French team, the team from France, and they're missing a couple pretty stout players. They're missing MVL and they're missing Faruja. Uh,
Yeah, if they had those two players, I think they would be. And what would their average rating be? Probably top three team, I would assume.
yeah, they'd be replacing a 2630 with and a 2550 with two 2750 pluses.
Right.
So, I mean, their average rating for the team would be going up something like 75 points or something.
Yeah, I think
And
that puts them like second or third if they would have had those
yeah,
2
yeah,
players.
yeah, yeah. They would be, top 2 or 3 team if they had those two players. As is, they don't. So
I gotta break down the stats a little bit on these win probabilities now, JD. So knowing that the US team has a 2770 average rating, let's assume they're playing a team with a 2670 average rating.
uh-huh.
The expected score in one single game with that difference is about 64%, so 0.64 out of 1. But over a 4-game match, the US has about a 70% chance to beat a team 100 points lower and a 22% chance to draw. So that means that the odds of them losing are only around 7%. I think this bodes very well for the US team's chances. Like, I don't think they're really going to lose any matches. They might not lose a single match out of 11 rounds. It's going to be draws and wins. So it's up to the other teams. Can they keep up with that pace?
So what you're saying is that we have close to not much more than a 7 to 10% chance of losing any individual match.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you think that going into that means the US team is going to play more aggressively, or do you think they're going to play a little bit more conservatively?
I think it depends on who they're playing. You know, with such a long event like this, the US is going to be a huge favorite over like a 2,600 average rated team. But think of the teams that are kind of chasing the US: India, Norway, Spain. When they face a 2,600 average rating team, their advantage is much smaller, right? So I think the US can take a lot more risks against the lower teams, knowing that on the other boards they can make up for it if they do have a loss.
Which is another thing that one of the reasons why I think we're possibly going to get some potential, like far more interesting games than you typically would get in a traditional Swiss, because of the match situation. So, like, you may have a situation where your team is losing and you must win on your board. And so, like, you may be in a kind of a dry position that in a typical tournament, if you're only caring about yourself, you would say, it's too risky to play this for a win. I'm just going to try to draw. But you're in a must win situation. So you're forced to go and do some crazy things on the board in hopes to try to win, because there's situations where a draw and a loss are effectively the same thing for your team.
Right. Yep, that's true. Should we jump into a couple games that we have prepared?
Yeah, yeah. Let's look at the games.
All right, so we'll head over to the chess.com classroom. And the first game we have was prepared by JD. Take it away.
Yeah, so I wanted to look at a game that followed, the chess goals repertoire, and also featured a player from one of the teams I'm rooting for. And I found this really nice Queen's Gambit declined game from Caruana between I can't I always have trouble pronouncing her name, but it's Jovanka Houska, which I think that you should be proud that I picked her, because I actually on my bookshelf back here have a Carapon book that she wrote. And so it's a little bit sad that I'm showing a loss from her, but one of my early introductions to the Carapon was a book written by her.
I think that was my
So
first Caro book as well.
so it doesn't start out as a Queen's Gambit decline. It starts off as like a Nimzo, and quickly transposes, and we get this sort of position here after everything's sort of settled. We get this knight e2 line, which I've really been playing a lot lately. I used to play just always knight to f3, and I was always just going for a minority attack. And I kind of decided I wanted to try to learn to play something a bit more dynamic. And well, that's going so for me. But anyway, Caruana's got the white position here. And we get knight f8, still standard, and on f3, which is our sort of key signature move. And our idea is to play e4. White's in no rush to play e4, though. We have a lot of preparatory moves to make. So g6, the idea being that perhaps we want to come out to here and blunt this diagonal. The other ideas are, sometimes you see them bring the knight routes this way and then supports the bishop coming out. So Caruana doesn't care. He just brings this knight to d1, which looks odd. Like, why do I bring the knight to d1? The point is that I'm going to push, you take, I take. This bishop might move, and we need this rook to support the d4 pawn. The knight e6 does happen. Of course, we're going to drop back our bishop, and then b6 happens, and then this move. Queen to c1. What do you make of that, Matt? That is not a move I would have considered before looking at this game.
No, it's not intuitive because the queen was already lined up with the bishop. My first thoughts are, okay, maybe Caruana wants the queen on this diagonal, and maybe he wants the bishop to retreat to b1, but I don't really fully understand it.
So I think though that makes sense, but I had a well, definitely we want to get to this diagonal. That makes I think that much is clear. But there's kind of another point. And let's say we played e4 immediately. We get captures, knight g4. Well, this is pretty obnoxious because we're forced to take this bishop. We often don't want to, and this e3 square is iffy. But after queen to c1, when we play e4, if we get the same thing, we'll just put a random move here. Take. Well, now this is no threat. This is if I can draw arrows. This is no threat at all. This is a totally different situation. We can actually just take, and this knight is going to run into problems. If it goes to f6, we can kick it, and we get something like knight d5, and then this rook is going to come here, this queen is going to come in, and we can start doing harassing maneuvers here. And so this is just a very different, because black doesn't have this e3 threat in this line. So I think it has something to do with that, and also just generally trying to go along this diagonal. And then also, why is the queen on c2 anymore hitting against g6? That's just not that useful. So after queen to c1, bishop b7 was played. The idea being probably c5 and trying to open this up and put pressure on the e4 square. So e4 happens anyway, and then knight h4 drops the bishop back, which makes sense. I really am a big fan of this just dropping the bishop back to f2. And I think especially because like I did this in an over the board game, and the guy looked at me like he was totally shocked that I didn't exchange the bishop. In the olden days, I always just exchanged this bishop, but holding it back, defending this diagonal makes a lot of sense. And bishop to g5, and we see the other reason of halting back. Notice this queen and bishop we're really looking at these dark squares, and I think it's all because of this g6 move that happened. So captures, f6 happens now. So why f6? I mean, f6 seems like a strange move. I wouldn't really be thinking about f6, but seems like it must be trying to stop e5.
I think it's in preparation for e5, yeah. So let's say f6, e5. Would you push past as black, or would you capture?
I mean, what would I do, or what would a good player do?
Good player.
I don't
AKA
think pushing
you.
past is so great because I think we just have a wonderful pass pawn here, and I'm probably even just going to switch back to the queen side and just go for a standard minority attack. And your counterplay with c5 is probably not as good. I really like having this pass pawn now. I think this is less good. I'm gonna advance this pawn, solidify this, and I think I have an advantage. So I don't think that's the idea. I think the idea is probably to just take it. I think that's probably the idea. And if I take back, maybe even your own queen comes out. And I think this is this is starting to become a bit scary because this kind of stuff happens. This knight maybe jumps in, and like I think black has some legitimate counterplay here.
I agree. Those two knights for black are looking good.
Yeah. So I mean, f6 happens, and then I really like the way that Caruana followed up with this. He doesn't obviously rush with e5, which is a big idea. He plays g4. Going to kick that knight back, and he's not going to let f5 happen. So knight gets driven back. Now we get to hammer that queen into the h6 square, and then queen d7, lifting or defending this way. Now f4 happens. It's just like a full-on pawn storm. I think this is just such a cool thing. Now, black chose to take the pawn here and give up the piece because they've got two pawns. And I suppose that they're afraid of what to do, but it's not clear what they should do instead. Like, for example, let's say you just make a natural sort of looking move like b5. Well, that's just not natural at all. It just loses a pawn.
I don't think there is a natural move.
Yeah.
Let's say rook a d8. Let's say rook a d8 for black. Just trying to improve.
Just trying to improve. Well, now f5 happens, and this knight's got to move. Surely we don't want to take here. That just seems ludicrous. So something like knight g5, and we're just going to blow open everything. This whole diagonal is going to get really weak. We're going to play h4 to kick this knight out again. I mean, this is looking awful. This you can't even take because I'll take the knight now. So this looks terrible. So instead, chose to give up the pawn, and now it's just rather clean conversion. The attack on the king side is maybe kind of halted a bit now because Black gave up a piece, so and got several pawns for it. But if we just look at the way he wraps up the game, just making some trades, being up a clean, happy piece, and yeah, it's kind of nice the way he consolidates here. This move was probably turned out to be a bit of a mistake. But Black had to do a weird move to take advantage of it. It was like King F7, which is not an obvious move at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, just a clean conversion. He got so much pressure on the king side that Black felt compelled to give up a piece. And if we just look at the way he converts it, he's just up a piece. He's just going to try to get everything in the right position, and slowly but surely, just start taking pawns. And we get to this point, hasn't even actually captured a pawn yet, but decided to call in the day here because this knight's forced to move out of the way, and then this comes, and you can't hang on to the knight, and I'm just too many pieces down.
And if Black would play rook c7 instead of rook b8, what would happen there?
So you're saying here instead of rook c7?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I have knight f6 check, and your best move, say you try to move out of the way. Well, now I have rook d8, and when you come here, I have this.
So the fork's coming no matter what. Very nice.
Yeah. You're gonna get the fork no matter what. I mean, that was a little bit convoluted, a little bit hard to see, but it's and if you come here, you get the fork. If you come here, you don't get a fork, you get a discovery. So it's just all bad. So anyway, I thought this was a really nice game. And this is the kind of game that I hope we get to see Caruana playing this week. There will be some mismatches, in the early rounds of the Olympiad. It's going to be nice because they're going to be playing much weaker teams, and so we'll get the opportunities to see Caruana and the rest of the American team and the rest of the other strong teams playing teams that are much less strong. And so we might get to see some cool games like this.
Yeah, it is fun to see these super GMs outplaying IMs, FMs, players a few hundred points lower. I really enjoy those.
I don't just really enjoy them. I think they're really instructive too.
Yeah, I do as well. So now we have Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces against Pragg with the black pieces. This was a rapid game that they played, and this is a pretty famous game. I wanted to show this one because we have the leader for the Norway team facing off against one of the India 2's players, which is one of my favorite teams of the event. And we get this sort of like Queen's Gambit decline Tarrasch defense. And you're kind of an expert in these pawn structures, JD. What do you think of this opening?
Yeah, I think this looks kind of like a semi-Tarrasch, and I like these positions for Black usually because I don't mind having the isolated queen pawn. In fact, I would probably tend to try. I hope for these kinds of positions, but I think this is fairly comfortable for Black.
And we get this position. So instead of going against the IQP, Magnus could have played knight takes d4 here. He decides to take with the e pawn. This is interesting.
Showing proper fear of the isolated queen pawn.
Yeah, it's interesting. He didn't want to give up a space advantage. And now we have this complete symmetry of the pawns. All four knights are out. The only difference is the bishop on b5. So very close to even position. And both sides make a little room on their back rank so their kings can escape, h3, h6. And this all looks pretty standard. And if I were to look at this game live, I'd be thinking, they seem to want to draw. Like, how are top level players going to outplay each other from this position? It just looks too symmetric. Knight e5, c8, bishop f4. So both sides trying to get their rooks into the game. Queen b6. And now this is kind of the first interesting decision of the game. Magnus decides to play bishop takes c6. So what he's done here is he's given up a bishop. He's given Pragg the bishop pair, but he's created this potential target on c6. If you look at the very next move, knight a4, he's attacking the queen, and he's trying to plug this hole on c5, which makes the pawn on c6 even weaker because it's just going to be stuck there long term, and Pragg doesn't have the chance to play c5, gaining that isolated queen pawn that JD likes to play with. So what do you think of this idea? The trade in knight a4?
I mean, honestly, like, okay, I've seen this game, I've seen the computer eval, and I feel like that. I still feel like I'd rather be white here. Like this just feels good to me because I have this backwards pawn here. I've got a pretty good grip on the c5 square. Um, I and I'm not good enough to understand why the bishop pair is so strong. So I don't quite understand why black is ever so slightly better here.
I think black is better if the bishop pair can come to life, and that's probably going to involve playing c5 eventually. So let's see what happens. Queen a6, rook to e3. The rook is prepared to swing across the third rank, and it's probably coming to c3 to apply extra pressure to the c6 pawn. Knight e4, preventing that idea. Now, this is the first mistake of the game. Magnus Carlsen plays f3. And keep in mind, this is a rapid game, right? So there's a little bit of more clock pressure on these players. But pawn to f3 opens up this diagonal towards the king, and it also opens up the dark squares in general around the king. What do you think of f3?
It's I get why you would want to play it because you just said that I wanted to bring the rook here, but the knight's stopping that, and now it seems like the knight just has to go back home, and then we get to do what we wanted to do. And I get what you're saying that these dark squares are all weak, but I still have a dark square bishop to cover those, and your queen's all the way over here on this side of the board, so I don't feel the danger so much.
I agree with you. Just using my own brain, not looking at Stockfish, it makes sense. I would play a move like f3 here. And Prague finds the top move, knight to g5. And the reason this is so good instead of going to f6 is the knight actually wants to come back to e6, applying pressure on white's weakest pawn. So one thing we talk about, especially in our Caro concourse for black, always looking for the weakest pawns and using those as targets. So white wants to target this pawn, black wants to target this pawn. So that's why this
Is
is such a good move.
is f6 also a threat?
I think f6 could be played. Yeah, make this knight come back to g4 because it
Well,
comes back here.
you can't go back to g4 because I take the bishop.
That's true. So f6 right away, maybe knight d3. Yeah, it feels shaky. You're right. And Magnus here just ignores it. He plays rook e to c3. The strongest move, though, is actually bishop takes g5. And after h takes g5, using a cool tactic, knight to c5. And at first,
That's not the c5 square, sir. That's c4.
thank you. Knight to c5. I was looking at him like, wait a second. Knight to c5, just planting both knights on strong squares. So ignore the cool tactic statement. That was the wrong c5.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is close to equal because the bishops aren't getting into the game and the pawns are kind of locked down for black. Okay.
Yeah, black would have to eventually give up one of the bishops at some point against those knights.
Right. I agree. So here Magnus plays rook e to c3, just ignoring the stuff on the king side, piling up on this pawn. And Prague finds the top move. Again, queen to b7, backing the queen up. And she might even come to b8, getting on this diagonal and targeting these weak dark squares that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Bishop h2 played. I think that's getting ready for these kind of f6 ideas. Knight to e6, top move, targeting this pawn. Also kind of eyeing this f4 square. And now we see a huge decision made by Magnus. Knight takes c6. Another blunder, JD. This is the world champion blundering multiple times against the young Praggnanandhaa.
I'm looking at this and like it really does look like a free pawn.
Yeah, this is deep. So the
Yeah.
top move here, if you want to try to find it as a viewer, go ahead. The top move here is bishop takes h2 check. And Prague missed this. And like JD said, it wasn't very obvious why. After king takes h2, there's now knight to f4.
All right. Yeah, I'm not convinced yet, man. You got to. Why is this so bad for white? I'm still up a pawn, right?
So let's go
I
knight.
suppose. I guess there is a threat on the f2 on the e2 square.
Yep. So threatening a fork. So let's go knight back to e5. Play this out a little. Rook
Okay.
takes c3,
I want to take with the rook. Yeah.
f6.
Are you going to tell me I have nowhere to go with my knight?
Oh, there is
I do.
g4. And now rook e2. Highlighting this pawn.
This is too much.
Queen f7. So we've gone how many moves deep now? 5 moves deep. The engine is saying -6.5. Look at this eval bar. Uh, the best move is queen takes e2.
Yeah, this is wild though. This is like this is the kind of situation where Levy just calls the computer garbage.
Yeah. Well, so here's the threat though. Queen e8 is the threat, double attacking this knight. And if the knight moves, the tactics are leading to winning with g2. Rook takes g2. Just this is an insane line. So Magnus makes the blunder here. Knight takes c6. Pragg misses it. He plays knight to
It's not a
f4.
blunder if it's an unfindable resource to if only the computer can punish you, it's not a blunder.
Hikaru would have found it. Team US. Okay, knight back to e5. Bishop takes, pawn takes. So now if we count the material, Magnus is up 1 pawn. We have 2 versus 1 on the queen side. Knight to d3 played. Magnus swaps a pair of rooks, swaps another pair of rooks, and plays bishop to g3. So we're kind of back
Wait, are you
to...
going to try to tell me that Magnus loses an ending a pawn up?
Yes, with an equal eval. It's a 0.0. So d4 played by Pragg, b3. Pragg brings the queen up. Nothing too exciting happens for those couple moves, but now we finally see queen c1, and this queen is eyeing the white king position, and Magnus gets a little bit greedy. He goes for another pawn. The engine does not say it's a mistake, but now we have a 2-pawn advantage, and black has the initiative for it, right? We see this pawn, 1, 2, 3 squares from queening, nothing stopping it, and the white king is in a little bit of danger, whereas the black king feels pretty safe currently.
All right, I believe you that the D pawn is dangerous, but what I don't see is any real threats against my king.
We'll see. Knight c3 played by Magnus. Why did he play knight c3?
I think because it was so cool.
I mean,
Like, I
yeah,
don't know if it had anything to do with it being a good move. I think it was just a cool move. Well, I mean, to me, I think the idea of playing knight c3 is simple. I want to bring this knight is on the wrong side of the board, and I would like the knight to be here or here or here or anywhere other than a4, really.
yeah, because you're afraid of the checkmate threats, right?
No, I told you already. There is no checkmate threat here. I just want the knight in the center because that's where it's happiest.
So one thing to keep in mind too, I guess, is this pawn is hanging. So let's say knight b6 was played, knight takes
Yeah.
e5 could be in return. Okay, so let's go with the game line. Knight c3. There's only one move here that gives black an advantage. Pragg finds it. Knight to f4. So what's the idea with knight to f4? It
Well, the
looks,
idea is I'm just going to play queen takes c3 probably.
or there's this mate threat. Queen d2 and mate
Eh,
on g2.
I just take the knight. I'll just take your knight on f4, and then what are you going to do? You perpetual me on the dark squares?
Check and then take this knight back. That'd be my plan.
Yeah,
I'll go for your
yeah,
knight
yeah.
eventually. So knight d1, and now we see queen d2, and you know Magnus is probably worried here. He has to play knight f2, blocking the checkmate threat. Knight
Mhm.
e2 by Pragg, trying to open up this bishop or sneak in for a mate. Most likely the mate.
All
h4.
right, I believe you. This is starting to feel uncomfortable.
I mean, knight and queen are super powerful when the other queen is, stuck on the other end of the board.
Yeah.
Queen d7. Now we do see knight takes g3.
Oh, gives it up. Just
If,
gives up the piece for the pawn.
yeah, if king takes, there's queen takes e5 check. And after f4, queen e3 check. So this is looking really bad for white.
Yeah, we're losing the piece anyway, and white and black's keeping their pass pawn.
Yeah, so Magnus decides, let's grab that pass pawn. Knight f1 check played. Here there is an even faster mate. Knight to e2. It's a checkmate in 44 moves, according to Stockfish. Now it's saying 29. So he plays queen takes d4. Knight f1 check was in the game, though. King h3. Knight to e3. Now this knight is being attacked. The knight moves. There's queen to h1 check, followed by taking g2. Queen b2 played. Bishop to c2, and Magnus just resigns. He wants nothing more of this position. Youngster Prague takes down the world champion in a game that started with just a completely symmetric pawn structure. I think this was super impressive, and he kind of beat Magnus twice. He got the 5-point advantage. Magnus had that real complicated line on c6, went back to equal, and then he won the game again.
I still don't believe he had that 5-point advantage. The computer would have had that 5-point advantage, but Prague did not.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so that highlights 2 games of our favorite players. The tournament starts on Friday morning, and the start time, I believe, is 2:30 a.m. U.S. Pacific time, which is 5 a.m. U.S. Eastern time, which is sometime around like 10 or 11 a.m. European time. The games will be done early. JD and I will be reviewing them right around kind of our lunchtime, and then we're going to put up a recap shortly after that. So daily recaps coming up. You excited for that, JD?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you in the recaps. Bye, guys.